So I'm not great at building accessible JavaScript-based applications, but I want to be, and I'm learning a little bit every day. So when I came across an article recently on maintaining focus within a container element, I wanted to see if I could reproduce that approach using my own coding style. So you can see I have sort of three areas of elements here. At the top, I have this area here, and then a third area of elements at the bottom. And if the user navigates to this center area, what I want to do is maintain focus within that area, even if they go to attempt to tab using either tab or shift tab beyond the bounds of the container. So right now this container is focused, and if I tab, you can see that I can tab through the focusable elements, or the tabbable elements, I should say, within this container. And now if I go to tab beyond the boundary, instead of tabbing to the next element down here, we cycle the focus back to the first element within this container. And we can do shift tab, and you can see when I shift tab from the first element, instead of focusing the element over here, I cycle back around to the last element within this container. And you can see that I can navigate around these elements fine, but once I again enter into this container, attempting to hit shift tab, cycles back and doesn't go into this one. Similarly down here, I can shift tab and tab around, but again, once I enter this container attempting to tab, we'll trap that and cycle back to the first element. So let's take a look at the code to see what happens. The markup here is fairly simple. Here's my first area of elements, my second, and my third. This is the one that is going to capture and maintain focus and cycle between the focusable elements within this, or the tabbable elements, I should keep saying, within this container. So if we jump down here to the JavaScript, one thing you can see is that when that application starts up, when this demo starts up, I'm actually programmatically adding a tab index of -1 to my container element. That allows me to programmatically focus the element, even though it is not necessarily tabbable. So if we come back here and we refresh the page, what you can see is that I immediately get this blue border around the container. That's because I'm throwing focus to that container element. So if this container were, for example, a modal window, we'd want to bring focus into the modal immediately, and we could do that by adding a tab index of -1 to the modal and then applying focus to it. Now I'm also going to attach a key down handler to my container, and since the key down event is a bubbling event, meaning that it bubbles up in the DOM, the document object model, this allows us to apply a single key down handler to the container, which gives us a choke point essentially to listen for all key down events that happen on any element within the container or on the container itself. Now at that point, I'm going to check to see if the key relates to the tab, either tab or shift plus tab. And if it doesn't, I'm going to return out because I don't want to listen for all key down events, just tab based ones. Now, once we have determined that it is a tab-based event, we're going to query the local state of the DOM, the document object model, to try and find all of the elements that can be tabbable. Now, this is a static demo, meaning that the structure of this DOM isn't going to change after the application loads, but in a real-world application, that might not be true, meaning that the elemental state of this container may change based on the view model and the user's interaction. Maybe they're stepping through a wizard. We don't necessarily know that we can depend on the state of the elements when the container is first rendered. That's why I'm waiting until the key down event fires to actually examine the state of the DOM, the document object model, to try and find those tabbable elements. So what I'm looking for is any type of form control, any link that has an href attribute, and any element that has a tab index, which grants an element tabability, but of course where it's not -1, which allows it, which prevents it from having natural tabability, but again allows us to throw focus to something programmatically. Now, finding tabbable elements is actually more complicated than this if you want to create a robust and generic solution. But if you're just building a solution for your own application, you can probably start very simple and only deal with edge cases as they pop up, because they may never pop up. For example, this wouldn't account for things being disabled or display none, right? Because that is a sort of live state where we're just looking for elements. So once we find our tabbable elements, we then examine the event to see if we're using the shift key to navigate backwards, or we don't have the shift key and we're navigating forward. If we're navigating forward and the event target is the last tabbable element, we're going to kill the default behavior, so essentially prevent the tab from doing anything naturally, and then we're going to go to the first tabbable element and throw focus to it. Conversely, if this is the shift key, meaning the user is navigating backwards, we're going to look to see if we are the first tabbable element, right? If the first tabbable element is currently the one that has focus, and if so, again, we're going to kill the default behavior of the tab key and instead go to the last tabbable element and throw focus to it, right? So again, just to illustrate that with a demonstration here visually, if we're on the last element and I go to hit the tab key, we're going to kill the natural behavior of the tab key and cycle back to the first element. And here, once we're in the first element, if I use the shift plus tab key, we're going to kill that behavior and cycle back to the last element, thereby, again, trapping focus inside of this container element, whether I'm using tab or shift tab. So there's a lot more complexity that would go into creating an accessible container. So for example, if this were a modal window, one, I'd have to, again, draw focus to it programmatically when it first opens, but then if the user were to close it, you'd probably have to return focus to whatever the previously active element in the DOM was, which extends far beyond my skills today and also beyond the scope of this demo. But just being able to trap focus within the DOM in a particular container is definitely a step in that direction.